Night. Clock on the wall is fast. It is only 5:01. Okay, so everybody's aware. Will the clerk take a roll, please?
Yes. Carol.
Here.
Manning. Gill.
Here.
Glassburner.
Here.
Kirk.
Here.
Frank. Williamson.
Here.
You are here. Okay.
Hi, Steve.
Yep, I'm online.
All right, you have a quorum.
We in compliance with the open meetings law.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
We have before us a 14-point agenda. Looking for a motion to approve that agenda. Motion by Glassbrenner, second by Cooey to approve the agenda before us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We have also our minutes from the October 8th, 2024 executive meeting. Any questions, comments, corrections on those minutes? If not, the chair will declare those minutes to be approved. Item 6 on our agenda is public comment. We have a member of the public here that would like to comment tonight. Anyone online? All right, hearing no public comment, we will move on to reports. Item 7, starting with A, Dr. Tessa Melvin, our wage study update.
Okay, so today we had 4 meetings with county staff to talk about the position descriptions. Most new position descriptions are out. There are some that we've discovered, well, we had some that were turned in late, so obviously they're not ready yet, and those people know who they are. And there were a couple other ones that just got missed, so we're working through that, but I think out of the 400 and some, we had like 3. So I think we did pretty well. So we had 4 sessions. We recorded all of them. And we will be posting session 1 this morning. That was where the most questions were asked. So we're going to post that out so that employees can go and view it if they were not able to attend today. But overall, very, very good attendance. We talked about the appeals process, next steps, and what that really is going to look like going forward. So with that, Tessa is here to brief you on not only that, but the potential options, and we need some guidance.
Where will they be posted?
We're gonna, that'll be where MIS, wherever they tell us. If they're gonna put it on, they might put it on a drive, or they might have us send out a link. I'm not quite sure. Whichever they deem less painful to the overall infrastructure. So with that, yes, Tessa is going to speak with you, give you some updates, and then also we need some guidance from the committee as far as what you prefer us to do going forward to get to an end state on this whole process.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about like the market analysis, kind of who we use, what we found. So kind of the story of where are you to the market. Then spend some time discussing pay philosophy. So that's kind of where do you want to be to the market and how fast do you want to get there? What does that look like? I have like 5 questions that like would be a board decision. You either make tonight and we'll continue, or you need more time when we come back. And then I have all recommendation that I think would be put you in a good place just with some costs, so you can kind of feel where the market is, where you could be, what that would cost with the budget, and then you guys can adjust it based on your philosophy and all of that. So the benchmarks, again, you guys decided upon based on the indicators, who surrounds you. I just put it back in here because this is who we're using in the benchmark. Some of the questions today were, what about the private sector? Again, benchmarks are the counties because they're most apples to apples. We will incorporate private sector data when we need to, with like the nursing home and like ambulance, just because not enough counties have good matches. But using just your geographic location, that's how we pull that private sector data. Just some trends we're seeing overall, just so you can kind of see, is, you know, retail positions are pushing where their entry level is to that $20. Labor shortage, so of the positions that are open, there's less people applying for them. Increase in public sector, people are retiring, just leaving. Other entities are doing similar studies, and then the labor shortage is even worse in positions that have licensed requirements or certifications, or that are tech, just less applicable. So those are kind of just real general what we're seeing in the market. When we go through the analysis, I just like to point out of the jobs listed are the jobs that we found that have at least 4 or more data points for, so not every single position is going to be listed. And Candace and I talked about this today. I'm gonna pull in the nursing home a little bit separate because they were a little bit unique on how we pulled their data, so that'll update later. But with that, it has to have that many, so statistically significant. But I do have data for every single position, so we can kind of see. But what the analysis does is takes the jobs that are most like your benchmarks and kind of tells you where you currently are sitting. Then based on classifications, job descriptions, and the board's philosophy, will update that grid and pay plus. One other thing just in the preliminary is I'm going to show 11% spread between your min and your max of positions, but really for county jobs, it's step 3 because that's how it's recorded and that's where people start. And for like the nursing home, it's actually step 6. So you're not using for the county jobs 1 or 2, and for the nursing home, they're not using 1 through 5.
So this is kind of why we got to where we're at, because the original scale wasn't maintained properly. It wasn't adjusted as the market changed. So rather than starting people at step 1 and step 2, where you would normally start them, we've skipped over all that. So all courthouse, all positions outside of Pine Valley start at step 3, and Pine Valley positions all start at step 6 out of 8. So as you can tell, that doesn't give us much growth. It doesn't give us much of anything. So it's really almost reinventing the wheel now to build us a scale that is appropriate.
Well, what I will show in the analysis is the mids are at step 3 or step 6 for them, so you don't have to like go backwards. So at least we can see what you're using and how what you're using compares to the market.
Yeah.
So the pay philosophy, like I said, really is the board's decision. I will tell you the story of where you are to the market. Pay philosophy is where do we want to be to the market? Do we want to be average, within 5% of average? So average, you'll see is at 100% when I look at it, meaning of all your benchmarks, you're slap dab right in the middle. There are plenty above you and there are plenty below you. You're right in the middle. Textbook would say if you're within 5% of that, you're competitive. We're seeing, because of the labor market, some entities pushing to be a little higher than that. Others will say we have 15 benchmarks, but we really only care about these 5 benchmarks, so we're going to be within 95% of that. That's where you guys get to kind of come in and say where we want to be. And some will look at some of the pay philosophies will then help with the pay compression issues that you have and some of the other issues. So this is what you're going to see is basically here is the job description. This is your min, your max. And again, for county jobs, it's going to be that step 3 to the step 8. And then these 2 columns are your benchmark, min, and max. So all the benchmarks, I average it out and put the average minimum, the average maximum. And these percent will say where you are to the market. So this one's at 104, meaning if market's at 100, your minimum is about 4% above, which makes sense if that's really your step 3, you know what I mean? And 92% would be your 8% under that market average. So of that, more than half the entities are paying more on the maximum. Part of this reason is using the mins that I was given, that 3, to 8 and 6 to 8, your wage spread is about 11%. So from the minimum to the max, where the benchmarks are about 18%. So you have room to grow. And I have these listed, and I can provide this information, but this is more just to kind of give you a 10,000 foot, and then kind of we're going to funnel down on some decisions, and you'll see me more. You'll have reports and stuff you can analyze, but this is really just to kind of help with formulating kind of where do we go and what does that look like. Anything in pink, again, would be that it's more than 10% under market, and green would be it's more than 10% above market. Some of these might be because of the classifications, we'll fix that. Some of it just might be the market, the pay grid, all of that. But again, this just kind of shows where these jobs are fitting. And that's kind of where it ends. So if somebody were today to say, where is your pay grid calibrated at? it's about market average on the min. But again, using step 3 for county, step 6 for the nursing home, and it's 11% under on the maximum. Part of that is you have 8% to make up because your wage spread is so small, or 7%, I mean. That's part of it, and part of it is your wage grid really isn't doing what it was intended to do. Starting at 1, ending at 8. It's starting at 3 and ending at 8. Yep.
Can we start asking questions?
Yeah.
Our 11% spread versus the benchmark 18% spread. I'm trying to visualize whether they're all centered on the same average or parts are shifted to one. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, so you're like all the benchmarks, their wage spread would be from their minimums to the maximum is about 18%. Yours is on average because you have the sheriff's department is a little different, and then Pine Valley is going to be a little different. So on average, but yours is only 11%. Your steps between, like the step percentage is about 2%, but it's wonky because some are 2, some are 2.5, some are 2.19. That's how it makes up that 11%.
And they're not consistent. Typically, you see a consistent spread, and they're not. And so instead of it being from step 1 to step 8, and we have that whole gamut to add up to that 18, from step 3 to step 8, and from step 6 to step 8 is 11%.
But
So
to your point, I think
condensed.
it is average with all of the jobs. So it's not just one job or saying they're all consistent, because again, Pine Valley is going to look different versus a county job because it's even tighter.
So if let's say we felt like we wanted to have a wider spread.
Yep.
Like our benchmark, does that mean our max goes up or our average?
Yep. That's where we're going.
Yeah,
Right.
in other words, that's where the difference is. It
Yeah,
not?
yep, and that's what you're gonna see, so like, part of my recommendation is, if what you're doing is starting at step 3, and it's at market average for most jobs, some may need to be reclassified, it's doing what you would want it to do if that was your market average. So to your point, I would say we need to add to the max, add more steps, because you cut some off, because you're not using them, and that's how you would make up the difference. If you chose though to be 10% above market, we would have to recalibrate the whole grid, so you're 10% above on the min and 10% on the max. So that's kind of why we asked that, where do we want to be? Because it might be the difference between percent between steps, number of steps, all of that.
There's a lot of different philosophies, and we've
Yeah.
talked about a lot of them today, a lot of potential. And this is where the guidance that you all give us tonight will help us to say, okay, these are our parameters. Now what makes the most sense to get us to where we want to be?
But I would say, I mean, for not having done a study in a long time and moving up to step 3 and 6, really your minimums are where you kind of want to be, but you lack here because they only have a short place to go and then they max out. So this means we have definite potential there. The benefit of it for the county is when you add steps to the max, you slow down the cost, because you're not going to put everyone right at the maximum step. They're going to go to the next step closest to. So it fixes the problem immediately, but it's a slower cost to the county because you have to go through the steps. Yeah.
So in terms of moving to this updated new step,
New grid, yep.
does that mean we will go back using step 1, which is equivalent to our step 3 right
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
Yes. Which will simplify a lot of things and bring more consistency and practice and equity across the board.
Yeah, and this just shows with the line graph. I know it's super small, you can't read the jobs, but what I like about it is these are your entry-level jobs. Those are your top jobs. What you see here is you're in red and the benchmark's in black. You flatline for a really long time where the benchmarks keep going up. Then you go up a little and you flatline, meaning you have a lot of positions that are paid the same range, which causes compression between them and their supervisors. Where the market kind of keeps going, you just stay really flat for a long time. So I would say we're going to, in this process, surgically fix some of those to fix those issues with the classification, the new jobs and all of that, and get you more closer to what that benchmark looks like. So what you budgeted, kind of like looking forward, I always like to go backwards. What can you afford? And then we talk about ways to implement, make changes that you agree on, but still within a reasonable, fiscally responsible way. Is you budgeted for about 5% increase to payroll for next year for implementation, we'll call it. That's about $800,000, okay? Part of your problem is you have 245 full-time positions. You have 230 seasonal, temporary
Call-in.
call-in
casual,
positions.
yep.
So you have a lot of those. I'm gonna really focus on the full-time first, and then per your guidance, we'll look at how we address those part-time. Because some of them might only call in once, you know what I mean? So to give them a huge increase and keep some of these might not be what you want, but if it is, we can fix it. But the problem, the biggest one that I would see is you have 58 positions of your 245 full-time that are paid below $20 an hour. So that's full-time staff that you're paying under that level. So if we looked at moving them to $20 an hour, and I just said that, you guys may say, no, we don't want to be that aggressive, you know, whatever. I just wanted to kind of show you some options. It'll cost $236,000. Some of them will get between, I think like 5%, and some would get like 15% because they're making $14 an hour. And you may say, nope, we're not going to do that all in 1 year, or we don't think they need to be at 20. That's your philosophy. I just wanted to show some like examples. Yep.
Back to your prior slide. Is there any reason why you wouldn't simply make it linear for the steps? I mean, in other words, stop the flat
Yep.
plateau and just make it linear?
That's what we're going to try to do with the classification mixes.
And that's
Because
what you're trying to say, how you calculated the next slide?
Yes.
yeah, and you can see like when those, you had some pink, some were pink, but some were green. Some means you're paying above market on some positions and some are super low. So I always say go in and surgically fix those through the job description and classification. Then we'll look at the pay grid for everybody, but really fix those that are significantly under.
And that's where, you know, today we highlighted that with employees. So let's say that you are being paid above the market right now. So you're being paid more than you should really technically be paid. And you've been being paid that way for a number of years. Great, good for you. But those people that are being paid $14 an hour, how many years have they been underpaid? They're never going to be able to go back and get those dollars back. So that's why we want to prioritize those people who we need to bring up to where they should be in the market. That doesn't mean everybody is going to be making $20 an hour either. If the market says that they're supposed to be at $18.75, well, then that's where we put them, right? But it's about correcting that so that they're within the market and we're bringing them up before we look at people who we know are above what they should be at.
Or paid right where they should be. Like we want to fix those that are drastically under, because if that position opens up, no one's going to apply for it.
And the positions that we're seeing that fall into those categories are CNAs, PCWs, housekeepers, our ambulance, which we all know is significantly below market. So, and there are a few others in there. We're not talking about the people that are basically kind of, you know, like the lifeguards and those are just more of a seasonal or a call-in or on-call type position that they're not our steady day in, day out, full-time staff.
And then if you did do like a 2% COLA or market adjustment, whatever you want to call it, that would be about $245,000. And then you basically have about $300,000 for implementation. And what that means moving everyone to a new pay grid and a step. Now, when you do the step, you can decide. Currently, you guys do steps on their anniversary date. You might say, we'd like to do it January 1st, or because we want to slow that cost down, we might do it July 1st next year. Do you know what I mean? So they're still going to get it, but it slows down the cost. So you guys can make some of the adjustments for the other positions.
And there are advantages to just doing the step and the COLA all at one time, just getting it done and having it be consistent. That way it's a lot less maintenance. Everybody knows what they're getting. They know when it's coming and they can plan for it that way. So that's where, once we really drill down on these numbers a little bit more, we'll be able to tell if that makes sense or if it doesn't.
Right, and I would say like even this slide drills it down even more. Of your 58 employees that are below that 20, unfortunately, or fortunately, depends how you look at it, 40 are the nursing. So that is a huge cost, but they also have a different process for budgeting and all of that. So take it for what it is, but I wanted to drill that down. But 24 of those employees make up 170,000 of that 236 because they're so far under $20. And that's where you guys can say, we're not doing that all in one year. We're going to implement a $2 limit, year 1, year 2, year 3. That's our goal. I just wanted to kind of throw some examples out so you could say, like it, don't like it, because it's hard to make a decision if you don't know what you don't know. So if I started, it's super easy to edit somebody else's.
So roughly what percentage bump would that be for someone who you're trying to surgically adjust?
Yeah, so in this group of 20, some of them might get like a 5%, but there are a couple that it's like 15% because they might be at $14 an hour.
Okay.
But again, in the scheme of things, I would also say we budgeted to be able to do this and to do it the right way and to do it now. And that was the beauty of what we did and why we set aside the money that we did in conjunction with talking with Tessa and looking at where we're at. So, you know, we're going to be able to do it all now if that's what you choose. If you really feel uncomfortable with that, then we can talk about, do we do part now, part in July, and then do another January 1 and July 1 for those people who are above maybe 10%, things like that. We have options when it comes to that.
I always say like what I'm presenting is like the cost, and what we're going to do is go in the couch cushions and find the coins so we have more money, or we can delegate it where it's coming from. But I like you guys to have financial numbers when you make a decision so you can say, oh wow, that's the impact.
So until now, we've been talking about in respect to market, but now we're saying to get everybody to 20. So what is 20 as a
That's about the market average.
Yeah, and like just in looking at where people would be working full-time outside the county, that's more typical. You may say we don't need to be that high, maybe it's a little bit lower on some jobs. Again, pay philosophy, we can talk about that. I just set that as like, here's a parameter and you can say like it, don't like it, here's what we want.
Because again, you know, if the average for that specific job is actually $18.75, well, then we're obviously not just gonna go pay them $20 just
Right.
because. But that's about the average. That $20 is about the average for those positions.
And
Some
I
might
just-
be a little higher, some are a little lower.
And I always say, think about too, that's their full-time position. What is a livable, you know what I mean? So that's how I try to put it.
Well, and you made a good point earlier that I just hadn't really thought of, but how many of those people then have to take county services because they're not making enough money at their county job to support their family? So then they're relying on county services on top of it, which is a very good point that, you know, you just don't think about that domino effect when someone isn't making what they should be making up front.
And you're not alone. Like I would say a lot of entities are just focusing on this low level because the market is what it is and the private sector is pushing you to like the Walmarts, whatever, you can go there and work. And that's pushing it. Before it hadn't been as bad, but with the labor shortage, it pushed it. So that's part of what it is. So on this slide, it just says kind of next steps and decisions. So I need to finish the job descriptions and the classification. That's on me. But like some board decisions are, one, do you want to kind of set a parameter? And it doesn't have to be final. It might just be, yes, Tessa, keep running the numbers at $20 an hour. Then the next time you see me, we'll drill it down by department, by where the funding is coming, and then you can even change it. But at least this sets a parameter for me to keep going on the budget so we can kind of keep drilling it down.
The other piece of that is too, human services positions. There may be grant funding that will offset part of this cost too. So as we drill down, we can pull those additional costs in, because that will really offset then our pool of money that we have to work with and free some of that up. Because if half of that position is grant funded, well, then half of the wage increase will be grant funded as well. So those are all things. Angie has, income. She has revenue that offsets that expenditure for Pine Valley. So those are all things that we will take into account then as we use the guidance that you give us to drill down on this philosophy and.
And you don't have to there's no formal decision tonight. This is more like, keep running with the numbers, because until we see more, we don't know. But it just kind of helps me keep going along, and kind of helps you know, hey, wow, this information is great, but where do our decisions start coming in, and how will that impact all the costing? Yep.
So, and just throwing this out, instead of saying, let's at least get everybody up to that 20, what if you just said, let's just get everybody up to market?
Yep.
How would that be different?
It'll be a little bit less. Like ambulance definitely will be at the 20, but maybe some of the other positions would just be a little bit lower. And so I can run that number. It won't change much.
That's really an average is what.
Yeah. Because the ambulance might go up a little. So on average, that's what, but I can run it for sure, like do it, and that's what I will do. But I just kind of wanted to show you, like this is the pie of 800,000 you've set aside. A third is already gone. Do you know what I mean? Like how fast it goes and where it's going to. Yep.
I wonder if you could set up different parameters that give us a two-stage increase.
Yeah.
So that people would get, it's now.
Yeah.
And then in July, they would get another increase, and you could kind of like figure out what that would be, basically.
Yeah. No, we can run that super easy.
Yep, we can do one scenario where it's all up front. We can do another scenario where it's in part. We said that with COLAs too. Do we give, part of the COLA on January 1 and part in July? Or do we give one COLA of maybe 2% in January and a 1% in July? Again, based on how those numbers run, what do we have left of our pie? What makes sense?
Yeah.
So those are all things that we've kicked around a lot of ideas.
Sure, but especially to give some people something right now.
Right, and that's exactly what we want to do is, so like the COLA, cost of living or market adjustment, everybody gets something and everyone gets an equal amount. After that, we're fixing some of the problems, we're surgically fixing. So you could do, like Candace said, 2% on January 1st, everyone's getting a 2%. If you did 2% on January 1st and a 2% on July, they get a 4, but it's really a 3% cost because you only have to pay for half a year in 2025. Yes, 2026 looks different, but do you know what I'm saying? So that's where you tell me some more parameters and I'll play with all the scenarios, because I like to back into what you're comfortable spending, and then we can figure out what that means and what we can achieve. Yep.
2% COLA. How did you decide that, and how that compared to the consumer price index or all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so most counties don't use the consumer price index because it varies so much. So like if you did last year, you would have paid about a 9 to 15% increase, where in years past it would be 0.25%. Most counties, I will say, just as a market adjustment, like we're all going to do 2% or all going to do 3%. So it's not truly a cost of living. If you do by the consumer index or labor index, or some will do social security index, then you have to like measure it monthly, and then you have to average it out for quarterly, yearly, whatever, so that it's actually a consistent number.
So 2% is something most people use just to smooth out the curve. So
Yeah, and I would say, if we could do more, that would be great. We're seeing 2 to 3% COLAs, but because we're doing other stuff, we might slow year 1 down, and then year 2 looks a little bit different. I just threw it out there as a starting point, and for me, 2% again is about a third of that pie. So I got a third spent for the 20, a third for the COLA, and then I kind of have another third for other implementation and surgically fixing.
It kind of sets a precedent. too.
Yeah, and then we can go down, we can go up. That's super easy. These just help me understand, yes, we feel comfortable, keep moving, or no, we don't want to do that. The other one is decision. So right now your percent between steps varies. I don't know who created it, if they were whatever, but it's like 2.1, 2.25, goes back to 3, 2.1. It's not consistent. So from like budgeting, it's really hard to budget what that would cost. Where it'd be a lot easier, and most entities have just a flat. So 2% or 2.25 or 2.1. It would just make it cleaner. The only issue there is you then have an implementation because people are going to be sitting in between when we give, so there's a little cost up front, but in the end, it would be much cleaner, much more easy to budget, and it's more what you see years running.
That's what I meant when I was talking about linear earlier.
Yeah, yep.
And then employees kind of know too. They know that it's gonna be 2% the next time they get a raise, or 1 whatever we make that spread. It's very consistent,
Yeah.
very easy to follow.
And then the last one is just expanding the spread. So I'm just suggesting if you did 3 additional steps, that gives you about 7%. That would kind of put you right at that market average on the maximum. 3 more steps, you're kind of not using the first 3-ish. So, or more, depending upon where you are. It's just an easy way for me to kind of fix it and get you something that is more like the market and that you guys can manage and maintain, and you know what the cost.
And to be clear, we're going to have one scale. There is not going to be a separate scale for Pine Valley and the courthouse or everyone else. It's all going to be incorporated into one scale. So it'll be much easier for everyone.
Right. He is job classification.
Yeah.
Yep, and realizing that, yep, we have RNs. We have 2-year RNs, we have 4-year RNs, we have public health nurses, and we have nurse managers. That's what we call a career ladder.
Yeah.
That's where you take and you look at what are the qualifications necessary for that job class, and then you create those pay structures within that. So that doesn't matter if you're over at HHS as a nurse or you're at Pine Valley as a nurse, there's a ladder and you fit in there somewhere. Social workers, same thing. Are you a social worker at HHS or are you a social worker at Pine Valley? What are those requirements and where does that ladder take you? So that'll all be built into one singular scale rather than having all these separate scales out there.
Yeah.
Are there situations where, like a supervisor could say, I'm an exemplary employee and I want to give them a larger increase? Is there ever time you can tie job performance to the increase, or is that not?
We don't have pay for performance. What is in the handbook now will have to be rescinded because basically what's in the handbook now is that a department head can hire up to step 4 at their discretion. Well, that's part of what got us here, right? Is that there wasn't a consistent practice in hiring. And so typically when you right size a scale, it's everybody is hired at step 1 because you know that's where the market is or above where the market is. So we're paying them well. Now, let's say that that's something that the board would wish to have, then I think we have to develop a policy on merit increases, and then that has to be approved through the board process because, or through the county administrator process, whichever, because otherwise you're gonna have, people saying, oh, I think so-and-so is outstanding. I want to give them an increase. And, then you get into that inequity piece again, because then all of a sudden people are cherry picked and it causes, and we don't have pay for performance at this point. To create a pay for performance scale is a whole other ball of wax.
And we can do that.
Yep.
Let's just do babies first.
Yep.
Then we can build.
Yeah, it sounds complicated.
Yeah. It is, but it can be done, and there are a lot of ways, but I think let's fix the real
Basics.
issues and the basics, and then we can build that way.
Yep.
So of those 4 kind of board decisions, does anyone have like, whoa, red flag, hold up, or another suggestion? Or can I kind of keep using that for costing and then give you guys more detail to kind of, drill in and make more decisions?
Sounds good starting point.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
The only question I had, just a couple questions. Okay, so how many steps is the thought process? How many steps are there gonna be? And what about, where are you at in the steps according to years of service? So I
Yep.
get the first step, you
Yeah.
just got hired. But I've been here 25 years, I should be at the top step. And I hate to say it, but that's where that should be.
Yep.
And if you're not gonna do that, I struggle with that. I mean, that's where my struggle.
Well, we can run the cost.
That's gonna cost a lot.
Yep.
Right, so typically, so this is how I answer that question. So typically, like, I'll run the cost scenario because it's easy for me to do and just to show you what that is. But my argument against that is I don't know when your pay grid came out of compliance or competitiveness. I don't know what the board before you sat as so you're as an employee asking me to pay today's rates for yesterday's work. Cause I don't know when the wage grid came out or what the pay philosophy was. Typically, most entities will start with move you into the grid closest step to what you're making that benefits you. You have growth with extra steps, all of that. Second, if you still have money left, then they look at tenure and say, if you've been with the county more than 10 years, you get an additional step. If, like you can kind of plan it that way, but it is gonna be a lot larger cost because in general, they've been maxed out for a long time. Some of them might have been. So even if we did 3 steps at 2, that's another 6% on top of it.
And I understand that, but the past of this county, they went years without a raise.
Yeah, no,
6, 8, 10
Yep.
years without any raise. And then this wage study come in with 8 steps, never got to the 8th step in most cases, which that's where I struggle. Of course, I work in private industry and we don't mess around with wage. We go right. I mean, you start here and a year from now, you're at top wage. You know what I mean? Now, every year, then you're just dealing with a COLA increase. And maybe some adjustments according to industry. You know what I mean? If one area is getting paid more for whatever reason, then that adjustment is made that way.
Yeah.
So.
I would tell you that we do have a lot of people that are topped out. We have a lot of
I have
people,
no idea.
yeah, we have a lot of people
But
that
my
are on
point is
that
there's
top
people
step.
that aren't, and they've probably been here a long, long time, and they're not at that wage.
yeah, and what I can actually do is, can't think of the name right now, because I've been talking all day, but there's a formula that we can do. But you basically take the min and the max and your years of service to say where you should be based on that, and it'll give you like a ratio, and we literally can do a pivot table that'll show every single position and on average where they are, because it might be, I'm just gonna throw this out if anyone's listening, could be like social workers are the most under their maximum because they've had all these weird changes, or it could be the other way, I can't think of the name. It's used a lot, but I can run that really easy to show you like where they should be based on their tenure and the wage grid. And then we can also just show you actual, like of your 245 employees, 200 are at the max. So they're gonna gain, if you didn't do anything, they wouldn't gain anything.
That would
So-
be good to see.
Yeah,
To answer your first question, it'll be steps 1 through 8 again, right?
yeah, yep.
So how many years, is that 8 years, or is that
Yes.
16 years?
Everybody moves through, each year you get a step increase,
Step 7 years,
Yep.
because you start on step 1.
and then you're
But-
maxed out.
To your point with pay performance, you shouldn't really be moving unless you're meeting standards. If you're not, you should be on a PIP and you should be froze. So that has to be with performance.
Yep, and that's something we can address at
It
the
shouldn't be
department
that
head
dead
level
weight just.
and through policy. But,
Again, we'll just start little.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll start little and,
those are changes we can.
Mention stuff we could consider for the future, something like longevity pay might be another issue.
Exactly.
in the future
yep,
To address people.
Longevity pay, additional longevity days. I mean, there are other ways to
Yeah.
reward longevity that don't necessarily equate to wages. And we were very clear in the very beginning with everyone that just because you're at the top step now does not mean you will be at the top step, because in my last county, when we did this, if we would have rewarded for longevity, it would have been an additional $1.9 million. So it's significant when you start just jumping everybody to the top, especially if you're adding 2, 3, 4 steps. I mean, those are significant increases.
And as a resident, if you do put me at the top and I get a 10% increase, but now my property taxes had to go up 15% to pay for it. You know what I mean? Like, that's not gonna help me out either, so.
So with the scenario you sketched out so far.
Yeah.
I didn't quite catch where we are with the pool of money we created with the 5%.
I will have used most of it
Okay.
in this scenario, and what it does is it typically would move, and don't quote me because again, lots of variables, but it will keep your minimums, we'll keep that where we're at, about market average, and it'll bring up your max to about 95, 96% of market. So we won't be at 100%, which could be your goal, but maybe in year one, that's a good place to start, and then we keep moving along so that you guys can slow the cost down and you get there when you can, not try to do it all at once, unless you find a whole bunch of money that.
We can find money. There's a lot of people won't like where I. Money.
I know it.
There's money there.
Those, how do you want to serve a long period of time? That was the pitch we got when we got the first scale was, and then you progress. And as a board, we never progressed.
Exactly. So that's
what we
the
pitched.
fear going through this. I mean, we go through all this work and, okay, so how much is it gonna cost us next year?
Well,
And how much is it gonna cost us 5 years down?
and that's the beauty
Beauty
of
of it.
having an ongoing maintenance. I am doing those costs every year and I can do 5 years out for you if you want. But the other beauty is we won't have some positions that are 20% under market because we'll be catching them sooner. So it'll be minimal budget disruption. And we'll be like saying, okay, we didn't do a COLA, now we just fell 2% behind market. Do you know what I mean? I would say for the 7 years you didn't do increases, you're not at a bad spot. Like the minimums are fine. So like moving people up isn't gonna be the cost. It's going to be, they have been maxed out for so long, they didn't get anything else. Making up that difference is what we're doing.
And that's where you guys have already adopted the ongoing maintenance. So that means every year, we're looking at the grid as a whole. We're saying, does our grid still fall within the market? Tessa looks at every job every year as far as the mins and the maxes, right? And then we look at a third of every job description every year too. So that if there are significant changes that would change the point value and the placement on the scale, we're capturing it that right then and there instead of, waiting for another, 10 years to do it. And then there's these massive adjustments. And I can tell you in my prior county, we had usually 2 to 3 jobs that actually were adjusted every year. A lot of the adjustments aren't significant enough to warrant additional dollars, but at least we're capturing them as they happen. And if there's ever a time where the market shows that there's a job that all of a sudden is 10% below the market that isn't set to be looked at in that year, Tessa will say, Candace, we have to pull this one up now because they're too far behind. We can't let this go another year or 2 years. We need to adjust it
But
now.
I'm only recommending you guys have that decision. to
Yep.
make it, so.
But she'll alert me and then we can have those discussions to make sure we're staying where we should.
Right, so this is the big effort to do job classifications, do the full market study, but the next year, what's involved with seeing where we are with the markets? It seems like it'd be a lot easier.
Oh, yeah, well, I will do every single job again, so you'll see a similar report that has those jobs that look alike. I just don't have to do all the job descriptions, we'll focus on a third, and those third should be pretty close because they're brand new. So it gets less and less, the most pain for the county is this year because you have an implementation cost, and there's work by staff and supervisors this year. In years going forward, it'll be a lot less work, and you guys determine what the cost is. I'll predict costs, like if we reclassify these 4 positions, the impact for an annual rate is 32,000. Then you guys can say, yep, that seems fair, we can pay for it with X, you know what I mean? But nothing gets done without you guys having a say in it.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell us more about the longevity bonuses and what some of those might look like, and we don't have to go through right now, but at some point.
Yeah, I will in the next, I can show you what.
Possibility.
Yeah, I'll do like a table that kind of says the pros and cons of them. and a couple of different options, and then you can like gravitate towards one and we can kind of show what that would look like.
So when do we need to decide what we're doing?
We just need the guidance today, which it seems like you all are kind of saying, keep going with this, give us a couple of options and then bring it back. And that's really all this was bringing you along, making sure you're comfortable with where we're at, letting you know how the process is unfolding, what we're seeing initially, and then coming back with more definitive information now based on that guidance.
Right. I'm trying to understand when the go-ahead starts implementation.
Right now, we're at the first appeal. So everybody, you know, if they're unhappy with something that they see in their job description now, because it doesn't quite seem right, so they have until next Monday. Next Monday,
Predicting like cost to your check, not till January.
January 1 is when we'll start.
Unless you find money beforehand and want to do something.
The board would have to act on it at the December meeting.
Yep,
Correct.
That's what I.
Yep.
Okay.
yep. But the main thing is you have it budgeted, so like obligations and all of that, it's covered. It's just now where the pie is, how we're gonna slice it. Sorry.
No, this is fine. This is just, as an aside, I know this isn't the finalized presentation, but are we able to have access to this so we can see some of those charts a little bit better?
Yeah, she can upload it.
Yeah. I was just.
We were tweaking this yet
Yeah,
at 3
no, I
o'clock today,
understand.
based on crunching numbers.
And that it doesn't go
Public, no.
We're not finalized with it, so like.
Yep.
If you have it, like,
We'll put it
Guys know
just
your-
in your folder, but not in the actual public packet.
just because we're still working on numbers and nothing is,
understand.
so, yeah.
Okay,
But yeah, that's a lot of information. I just kind of wanted to give a 10,000 foot and then you guys help me and then you'll get all that when you have to make the final decisions. But so it sounds like we're good to keep going and, okay, if you have questions, like, let Candace know, she'll do it, but I'll keep working this way and get those different scenarios with January 1st, July 1st, and we'll keep looking for extra money too.
It's there.
Okay,
Good dig.
Good, thank you.
thank you.
So B under reports is county administrators report, human resources and short-term borrowing updates.
Okay, so, I don't know how many of you may have heard this or have not, but our zoning administrator, Katrina, has resigned. She's needing to be closer to family. Her family's about 3 hours away, and, so she is resigned. And so she will be with us until the end of November. And then, so the job's already posted, it's already out there. But it was a very tough decision for her, so we appreciate her, and she was doing an outstanding job. But yeah, so there is that. Short-term borrowing. So in the packet, you will see that we received the 3 quotes from Richland County Bank, Royal Bank, and Community First Bank. The interest rates that we received were 5.5%, 5.45%, and 4.49%. So the prior resolution states that I just had to basically pick one and sign off. But I didn't feel right doing that without giving some sort of an update on what we got and what that looks like. So we will be going with our lowest bid with Community First Bank at 4.49, which means our total loan amount, I guess it's not in here. Yeah, we don't have the total loan amount in here, but at any rate, that's where we'll go. So, Larry will be awarding that then after this meeting, and we'll be moving forward. Any questions on that?
Just curious which capital projects shuffle on for all.
No capital projects went away. You guys approved the capital expenditures. Everything that you approved is being done. It's just we reduced the amount of borrowing because we had leftover money, remember? So $400 and some thousand was from the audit that we did, where there were projects that either weren't done or, so, yep. So everything is getting completed that was presented.
Other questions for the administrator on these items? And we'll move on to agenda item 8, discussion and possible action revisions to the Richland County rules of the board. And we have online with us Attorney Andy Phillips.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And thank you for having me in this meeting. When we adopted these rules, I want to say it was probably 7 months ago now. We thought we were doing a good job on being comprehensive, but like any good set of rules, we know that there are revisions that are eventually going to be necessary. As I think I like to say in every discussion I have about board rules is that they tend to be a living document that county boards ought to take a look at from time to time to make sure that they reflect how proceedings are going and how you would like them to go in your county. So Richland County is no different in that regard. And so in conversations with you, Mr. Chair, County Administrator, County Clerk, and others, discussions about how things were going, we saw opportunity to revise the board rules to add some provisions that other counties had had success in implementing and thought could be helpful to Richland County as well. And so when we're looking at the revisions to the board rules, which I understand the revisions in red line format are contained within the board packet for this evening, or the committee packet for this evening's meeting, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, board members
Okay.
have them. They didn't get published online to the public site yet, correct?
They did to the county board, but not the executive meeting, so.
So in looking at the revisions, there are 4 general categories of revisions, and I'll go over each one. The first is language about exclusion of a member of the county board from a committee meeting closed session when that board member is not a member of the committee. That's in new section 4.10 of the board rules. I know that Richland County, and I've not been involved in the precise discussions, but again, my understanding based on conversation is that Richland County has confronted this issue recently, and there is a provision in Robert's Rules of Order which allows for the exclusion of a board member from a closed session committee meeting. Robert's Rules of Order are incorporated by reference within Richland County's board rules, and the Wisconsin statutes say that you need a board rule on the books in order to exclude somebody from a closed session under those circumstances. Rather than having all of this weaving, so to speak, and incorporation by reference, we thought, why not put it right into the board rules? And that's why the language is contained within section 4.10, which again is a new provision within the rules. And it's very simple. That new provision says that a board member that is not a member of a committee, other board or commission may be excluded from a closed session portion of that meeting upon majority votes of that committee. And so essentially, if a majority of the committee votes in favor of exclusion, then the exclusion can happen. I want to clarify that it's not just one person that can, the committee chair, board chair, or anything that can do that. It requires a majority vote of the committee that is seeking to exclude that board member. The second provision, I'm sorry, go ahead.
To clarify, the presumption then is that somebody can be allowed, it takes action to exclude, correct?
Correct. Yes. Somebody is able. So for example, if you have a board member that is not a member of this committee here tonight, that board member has a right to sit into that committee meeting. If this committee goes into closed session, that board member has a right to attend, and it would take a majority vote of this committee to exclude that board member. That's right. The next topic that is addressed in the revisions is better definition in the relationship between the board, the administrator, and county staff. That's in section 2.11 of the board rules. And essentially that clarifies the roles and relationships that exist between county board, county administrator, and then staff of the county, and how the county board is to get information from staff and so on. When we think about the role of staff, of course, is to implement the policy decisions that are made by the board, but it's also to provide the board with information necessary for the board members to make informed policy decisions. And so we thought it best to clarify within section 2.11 of the board rules exactly how that relationship exists between board, administrator, and county staff. Next, in section 2.14, we have
I have a
a
question.
lot of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
For that one in particular, I have a question, the 2.11 one. How does that look as far as if you're chairing a committee meeting, for example, and you need, maybe you're changing what information is being brought quarterly to meetings and whatever. It might, in other words, be a request for some action on the parts of employees because they're a part of the department that's reporting to that committee. How does that look under that definition?
Yeah, I think that's getting more into some of the minutia, which I try to avoid in the board rules because of course you can't solve for every circumstance that is going to become apparent in the county.
Well,
And so
I
when we
understand
look
that,
at
but
the language,
I'm just wondering if this rule then would exclude any kind of, I mean, I assume you're not talking about those kinds of decisions.
precisely, exactly.
Okay, I guess that answered that question.
So a committee could still request that a department head provide certain information on a regular basis to the committee.
Absolutely, because if you look at the last sentence, the committee has that ability, 100%.
It's more prohibiting a county board member from just calling up some random employee, let's just say, I don't know, child support. Calling Charlene, who's the office support and child support, and asking for information. That really should go through the administrator, then through the department head, then through. Now, if it was a committee, that's different, but
I just
just,
thought that we already had that in our board. I guess that's why I'm asking. Because
Yeah.
I didn't know that this changed what we were already doing, which I believed was to go through county
there
administrator.
are instances where this is not happening, so this clarifies that, yeah.
I have a question. This is Supervisor Severson.
Go ahead, Supervisor Stevens.
Can a tax-paying citizen still go to that department head and still ask a question without going to the administrator and then to the whoever after that? Or does all citizens of Richland County, if they have a question within that department, have to report to the administrator?
There would be nothing prohibiting them from asking a question.
But it's only the people who are prohibited is just county board supervisors.
Not asking a question, it's demanding information or providing direction. That's different.
What constitute a demand?
You kind of cut off on it. Was the question, what would constitute a demand, Carrie?
Yes. Would it be politely asking like, may I please see this? Or like, may I please get information on this or what?
Well, it
Mr.
just-
Chair, if I could briefly,
Yes, go ahead.
the word demand isn't in the revised 2.11. 2.11 as revised simply says that individual county board members shall not provide direction to the county administrator, a department head, or any county employee unless authorized by the board rules or official action of the board or the committee. And so there's nothing prohibiting a county board supervisor from making information requests, from having a discussion with department heads and so on. I would strongly encourage there be a process so that county board members individually are not asking the same 20 questions of a department head at different times. And so there'd be a process for that exchange of information. But the word demand doesn't appear in the revisions to 2.11.
Oh, thanks for that clarity. I just was wondering if just citizens were the only ones that could ask questions, not supervisors. Thanks.
Mhm.
Desire information, it should go through.
Are we ready to move on, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The third category of changes, third topic, if you will, is to establish expectations for board member conduct, and that's in the new section 2.14 of these board rules. And I will give a lot of credits to Langley County because they have a solid set of conduct expectations within their board rules. And Pepin County, which is a county I worked with on their board rules over the course of the last 4 years, just establishing again what is deemed to be acceptable conduct on the part of board supervisors, both at meetings and outside meetings. And so we have in 2.14a a set of common expectations that when somebody takes the oath of office, here's what's expected of them. Then in subsection B, we talk about conduct during the course of meetings. And then in subsection C, we have board member conduct outside of meetings. And then in subsection D, we have, again, it's just an overall expectation as it relates to interactions within county governments and outside county governments when somebody is acting as a board supervisor. Again, these types of rules, so to speak, are important just in establishing baseline expectations about how we interact with each other as board members and how we interact with staff and the public. I want to be very clear that this is not a set of ethics rules, that conduct that is defined within these board rules has nothing to do with the county's ethics ordinance, nor does it have anything to do with the state ethics code in 19.59 of the Wisconsin statutes. I think people oftentimes get confused and the lines blur when speaking about concepts of misconduct and concepts of ethics. And so I just wanted to make it clear that we're not talking about any modification to your ethics code. We're not talking about any supplement to your ethics code. That is a completely different topic. And when you're dealing with ethics, you're dealing with typically financial issues. And I would say the vast majority of which are financial issues and concerns about conflict of interest. Here we're just talking about conduct by board members. And again, this new section 2.14. Any comments or questions on 2.14?
I have one.
Yes, go ahead, Carrie.
It's Supervisor Stevenson. What is good conduct? How do you define that? Where could I go to look at that?
I guess I don't understand the question. What do you mean, what is the conduct?
Well, you talked about supervisors having good conduct as a supervisor. Like, what is good conduct? There's disorderly conduct that is in law, and it defines what
Mhm.
disorderly conduct is. What is good conduct that supervisors should be doing? And what's the difference between good conduct and bad conduct? Is that something that the board needs to define?
It is, and that's what's in this modification to the board rules in 2.14. If you look at subsection A, it goes through the 6 different points in defining what good conduct is. Again, this language is borrowed from some other county examples. It's borrowed from the rules of decorum that are contained within Robert's Rules of Order. And then subsection B speaks to this concept of good conduct, decorum at a county board or a committee meeting. And then subsection C of this new provision speaks to the concept of good conduct, decorum outside of those meetings. And then subsection D speaks to this concept of good conduct in dealing with members of the public. And so it's really this rule, this section 2.14, that defines the boundaries, if you will, of acceptable conduct.
So there's really not like a statutory law that says this is what good conduct is. It's all suggestive of what Robert's rules are because Robert's rules is not a law, correct?
Correct. That's
Okay,
absolutely
so
right.
it's all subjective.
Well, it's subjective in that the county gets to decide what the definitions are, but then once the county decides what those definitions are, there are a lot of objective components within this Rule 2.14 that speak to conduct that will be considered outside the boundaries of what's acceptable.
So basically up to the opinion of each and every county board after the 2 years when they reorganize, because they all could change the rules after every 2 years, correct?
Yes, if they change the rules, absolutely. They can change the definitions of that. Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Ingrid, go ahead.
On section D or subsection D of that one,
Mhm.
I guess it would be good to have, I guess, something of an example of what that might look like, because as you know, we receive a lot of, emails or phone calls, sometimes very specific and sometimes more generalized in potential complaints. And so the way that this was worded makes it kind of sound like you're basically referring everyone to, either the county administrator or a specific department head if it's a complaint about something within county government. And I guess I'm wondering, so does this preclude us being able to respond to those in a more specific manner? Because I could see that becoming frustrating for members of the public.
I don't know that it prohibits you from responding in a specific manner. I think what this is intended to do is to ensure that we don't have board members taking on responsibility outside of what they should be doing and otherwise directing operations or circumventing, if you will, the chain of command as it relates to resolution of some of these issues. I'll give you an example. If you get a phone call about a complaint about somebody within the highway department, instead of the supervisor calling that employee and saying, "Hey, I just got a complaint about you. What are you going to do about it?" What this rule is designed to do is to take that discussion through the administrator and the highway commissioner to resolve that complaint. Um, and I can understand the concern about not being responsive to your constituents because, of course, you were elected to office because of your constituents' faith that you're going to represent their interests. And so if they have an issue or a concern about Richland County government, of course, they're going to come to you. This rule is not designed to shut that process off or down. What this is designed to do is to try to encourage those complaints through the process where they are best capable of being resolved. That's the intent.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
One more question, Mr. Chair, if you allow.
Yes, go ahead, Supervisor Severson.
Thank you, Chairman Turk. Under 214A, parent 3, the last two words, community values. How do you define community values? Where could I go in the Webster Book of Dictionaries to find community values and what they are? Because I think every community would have different community values. How do we define our community values?
That's a really good question, and I don't think it's capable of precise definition because community values change over time. Community values in 1924, I'm sure, are a lot different than the community values in 2024. And so if you look at the language in that section 3 that precedes community values, it's that we're going to refrain from conduct which a reasonable person would deem unethical, offensive, or otherwise contrary to community values. And so it's the reasonable person standard. The reasonable person standard is utilized quite a bit in the law to define what is going to be considered, in this circumstance, good conduct or bad conduct. And so it's very difficult to give a precise definition on community values, and you point that out, and that's intentional because I think it is a bit malleable. It changes over time. This is just more or less encapsulating that concept that the way that we operate in Richland Center, in Richland County as a community, we're going to adhere to those community values. You're right, though, it's incapable of precise definition.
And there's no case law that you can look to that talks about community values, right? Because
Correct.
it's subjective to every community.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Other questions? Now we can move on, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the final section where there's substantive change is in the new section 5.01 dealing with enforcement of the board rules. And again, I want to reiterate that this is not an ethics ordinance. It's not an automatic referral to the ethics committee or ethics board. This is enforcing these rules, these board rules. All of the information that's contained within this new section 5.01, all of these remedies already exist for the county board. It's just they're not written anywhere. And I think I've had discussions with Richland County. I've had discussions certainly with other counties that speak to the concept of the board rules, setting the expectations so that we have successful meetings, we have successful interactions, and we don't have a need to enforce these rules. So if we have a procedure that is contained within these board rules, it is, I think, the desire of everybody that we never have to utilize the enforcement procedure. But nonetheless, if we do, then we have a process here so that everybody knows exactly what the enforcement mechanisms are. And so the presiding officer of any meeting, as indicated in these board rules, as indicated in Robert's rules, as indicated in this enforcement section, has authority to enforce the board rules. If it's appropriate, if we get to a situation where the conduct is outside the boundaries of these board rules and the chair of that particular meeting feels it appropriate, that chair can refer the matter to law enforcement because that can form the basis of disorderly conduct. If it adds up to disorderly conduct under the applicable statute or ordinance, then that law enforcement officer would have the authority to effectuate an arrest or otherwise write a ticket. That's up to law enforcement. That we as a county board can't define what disorderly conduct is, but this is in these board rules an opportunity to help that law enforcement officer say, look, this person's acting disorderly. And so we have the ability then to refer to law enforcement if that's appropriate. Again, I'm hoping that's never, ever, ever necessary. But having this in here on procedures, I think is important to put everybody on notice of what could happen. If somebody violates the board rules, the board itself has remedies that are within its discretion. Again, these remedies exist independent of what's contained in this 5.01. You can exercise these remedies already, but again, we put them in the board rules to put everybody on notice. It could be a situation where there's a private reprimand. There might be censure without a formal resolution from the board, censure with a formal resolution of the board, removal from the position as a committee chair, removal from a committee, and referral to the executive and finance committee to determine if there's cause to seek removal of that particular supervisor from office. If there's a referral to the executive and finance committee to determine if there is cause to remove somebody, and again, cause does have a specific statutory definition. That's in section 17.001 of the statutes. It's defined as inefficiency, neglect of duty, official misconduct, and this is the important one, or malfeasance in office. Malfeasance in office speaks to these board rules and the definitions of conduct and misconduct within these board rules. So if the executive and finance committee believes that there's cause to remove somebody from office, they still have to investigate, they have to file charges, and then that board member is entitled to a hearing before the county board. It takes a 2/3 vote of the county board to remove that particular supervisor from office. And there's a specific process within Chapter 17 of the statutes by which that investigation and hearing is conducted. So we're not modifying anything in statute that already exists within this new section 5.01. If we have a situation where it's not only misconduct as defined in these board rules, but it's also contrary to our ethics ordinance, we have the ability to refer to the ethics committee. And that referral will be considered a complaint under your ethics ordinance. So in other words, under your current ethics ordinance, a citizen has to file a complaint in order to trigger quote unquote jurisdiction of that ethics committee to look into the alleged violation. In this board rule, what we're saying is that if the executive and finance committee believes that there may have been a violation of the ethics ordinance, the executive and finance committee can refer the matter to the ethics committee, and that referral in and of itself is an official complaint under the ethics ordinance. Again, all of the remedies that we're speaking about here in this new section 5.01, they already exist. But again, I think that putting them in writing, black and white in these board rules helps everybody understand procedurally what happens if we have conduct that falls outside the boundaries of acceptable conduct under the board rules. And hopefully it acts as a deterrent so we never ever have to use section 5.01.
Mr. Carroll.
Chair, I was wondering if Andy could speak to how many other counties have had to explicitly add the enforcement section to their board rules?
Did you hear the question, Andy?
I did. I think there are two. This was actually borrowed from Langley County. Langley County did have an ugly situation involving one of their board members a few years ago. They added the enforcement section and they actually sought the removal of a board member, and that board member was removed, and that removal was upheld on appeal. It went through the circuit court and the court of appeals, and the removal was upheld. So Langley County felt the need to do that. And I believe there was another county that added this enforcement mechanism. I don't want to say the name because I don't have 100% certainty on which county it was, but I believe that there was another county. That's not to say that there aren't counties out there with enforcement mechanisms on the books. Those are just the two that come front of my mind right now tonight.
Okay, thanks. Other questions?
Supervisor Severson.
Yes, go ahead, Supervisor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phillips, how do you define inefficiency and neglect of duty in a county supervisor?
Yeah, it's a great question because that statutory definition that's lifted directly from 17.001 of the statutes, and the statutes don't define that terminology either. So when we look at the process for removal, it requires a 2/3 vote of the county board. And so in many ways, it's a political decision as much as it is a legal decision. Typically in a legal decision where you're asking a judge to make a ruling, you have to have precise definition on the terminology that the judge is going to utilize to make a decision. Well, in this circumstance, I think the legislature recognized long ago that the county board has a bit of discretion to define in its own mind what it believes inefficiency or neglect of duty to be. There are obvious examples of neglect of duty. If a statute says that a county board supervisor has to do something, statute commands it, then if the supervisor refuses to do that something, that's neglect of duty. It's a statutory duty imposed by the legislature. But in many circumstances, I think that the legislature in Chapter 17 recognized that county boards, and for that matter, other officers that are empowered with the authority to remove somebody from office, they're given a bit of discretion in defining that as in the way that they best see fit.
So again, it's subjective to that current county board.
Correct.
And then there's no case law that talks about what inefficiency is per county boards. And so they could, in theory, go, like you talked about, you referenced that case where it went to the circuit court and then the Court of Appeals, but it never went any further.
Correct.
So that
And
could
that
have potential going further and then coming up with something from that.
it could, but I think it's one of those definitions that's really difficult to nail down. And I say that because when we speak to inefficiency and neglect of duty, that changes over time. If you look at the role and the job of a county board supervisor today, as compared to even 20 years ago, I think it's very different. Go back 100 years, it's far different. Go back 160 years when this statute was written, it's way different. And so I think that the language is a recognition that the type of conduct or performance or lack thereof is going to evolve over time. And so the legislature did not handcuff, so to speak, a removing authority with specific definition. It more or less said, look, you've got these definitional terms that add up to cause for removal, but we're going to provide procedural safeguards in that you have to have a hearing, you're entitled to due process, and then it requires a supermajority vote for the removal petition to be affirmed. In other words, to remove somebody from office.
And that happens quite frequently, right? Other than just the one time that you mentioned.
What do you mean happens quite frequently? Removal?
Removal from an elected county board supervisor by constituents. Like that happens quite a bit where county boards may feel that a supervisor is being inefficient and they just, oh, I'm gonna take this up and we're gonna invoke Chapter 17 and to remove for inefficiency because they're not being a very good supervisor.
That's incredibly rare. I can tell you I've been involved, I think, twice in my 30-year career in questions surrounding removal, and I've been dealing with county governments all 30 years. So I think it's incredibly rare that we see that come up.
I agree with that, Mr. Phillips. Thanks. I just wonder how maybe, our, constitutionally First Amendment right of freedom of speech affects, some of these board rules, but I guess we're gonna have to find that out later.
Well, and that's a good point. It brings up a good point because the United States Supreme Court addressed that issue 2 years ago in a case where an individual was removed from a board and that individual claimed it was retaliation for exercise of his First Amendment rights. And so the Supreme Court was asked, the Supreme Court was asked, I can't remember the case. I should have the case memorized, but I don't. It involved the Houston County Community College Board of Trustees, I think was the name of the case. And the court was asked to determine where do you draw the line between protected First Amendment speech and conduct that would lead to your removal from a committee or a board in the United States Supreme Court unanimously? And so it's rare that we found unanimity, but we did. 9-0 said, look, a body such as a community college board, or in this case, a county board, has the right to define the rules of decorum. And if you violate those rules of decorum, even if your speech would otherwise be protected under the First Amendment, if you go outside those boundaries, that's grounds for removal. And I'm simplifying the case a bit, but there is recognition of First Amendment rights, but there is a justifiable basis for the government to place limitation on the exercise of those rights if it's going to create disruption.
Interesting. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
All right. Other questions? Anybody online with other questions? All right, thank you for presenting this to us, Andy. What we're looking for is a motion to move this forward to the board for tomorrow night. Motion by Mr. Gill, second by Mr. Cooey, to move this forward to the full county board tomorrow night for consideration. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion's carried. To the board tomorrow night. Thank you. All right.
Thank you all. See you tomorrow night.
Thanks, Andy.
Sandy?
All right, we are down to item 9, discussion and possible action on approval of contract with the Lou Everett Group for countywide training.
Okay, so what I've included in your packet is let's see, 2, 4, 5-page description of a county-wide training plan. And this is something that we haven't really done, county-wide training. And as we move forward, I would really like us to define between the board, department heads, and then spread to the county as a whole, mission, vision, and action items. So this will start with that. It'll work on workplace culture. It will work on building resiliency, conflict resolution training, crisis communication. It'll work on building our recognition programs, which is something we are sorely lacking. Resilience, as I said, and it will engage everyone in the entire county in developing some feedback mechanisms, and really building our strategic plan with the involvement of everyone, not just department heads and board level. And this is a year-long program, which is really exciting. So it'll be quarterly training, more often for department head level and county board level if wanted or if warranted. And so this amount of money that it would cost for this training is actually coming out of ARPA dollars. So in this case, I was supposed to have a meeting with them today, and they unfortunately double booked themselves. So I'm having a meeting with them tomorrow, which is fine because it will be after this discussion. But I would like to start this probably in December, just so that we have some identified goals. I wanted to start in November, but I don't know if we're going to get there with everything going on. But this way we go into the new year with a new mission, a new vision, and a new kind of planning purpose for what do we want to look like as a county and where do we want to be going. And since the new board has come in, that's not something that we've done. And so this would give us a jumping off point, and then it would lead us into revisiting our actual strategic plan at some point as well. So this is the proposal that I have.
Questions? Mr. Carroll.
Got no problem with that, General, but I have a bias towards any training like this being facilitated in person as opposed to remote. I know some mentions being remote, and I just think that if you have a skilled facilitator reading the room and reacting to that kind of stuff, it's much better than remote.
And we can bring them in. We just have to pay for it. The cost would just go up a little bit. And that's a discussion I think
I would agree with you. I think that's much more effective than virtual.
and I can ask them to modify the quote that we have, and what that would take to bring them in person.
Could we look at a mix of in-person and distance? Would you guys be more comfortable with that, or you want 100% in person, or what do you think?
A mix is fine, but I think the default should be in person, and then you decide from that whether you've done enough group cohesion that you can do so remote.
Does that give you good direction?
Yep. Absolutely.
Anything else we need on that?
Well, I was gonna take this to board tomorrow, but
Okay.
we,
Do we need a motion to put on? If not,
Well, if we're gonna modify it, then we need to get that done first.
right,
Unless you can get that modification done tomorrow.
I can ask. I don't know if they can turn it around that quickly.
Yeah, so we probably better just wait till our next.
Yeah.
You're okay with that? If we're looking to start in December, then that
Yep.
should still be.
That should still be plenty
Yeah,
of time.
whatever county board meeting you can go to. So. Okay, very good. Item 10, discussion and possible action, acceptance of donations to Simons Recreation Complex from the Simons Foundation.
Mike?
You're still awake back there.
Alright, so the foundation, obviously, they're up to about, if these are accepted, they'll be up a little over $50,000 this year of donations to Simons, and that's kind of their goal moving forward, is starting at the $50,000 marker. So these items that they're looking, coming from Simons, are coming from the foundation. Looking at refurbishing our sign out there in Highway 14, $4,600 for that the foundation has pledged. Deep cleaning of Simons, that's a one-time cleaning that professional cleaners come in and clean the facility, about $1,850. Purchase of 4 inflatable water rafts for the swimming pool, that would be valued a little over $5,500. That would be to help encourage more private swim parties, swim party revenues. Purchase of a new elliptical trainer that would be replacing 2 older elliptical trainers at about $3,000, and then 2 swimsuit water extractors to replace 2 older units that are in the locker rooms. They basically, like it says, extracts water from the swimsuits so that swimmers can take them home with them. So these are the what's been approved by the foundation to give to the county for Simons. There's no financial obligation of the county, so that's what's up for consideration tonight.
Mr. Carroll.
I move to approve the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Carroll, second by Supervisor Glassbrenner. Further discussion? Much appreciation to the foundation for their continued support.
Pass it on to them. Thank you.
yeah.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Well, thank you. 11, discussion and possible action approval of switch and license purchases for Pine Valley Community Village.
Alright, so this is our bid for new switches and internet use out at Pine Valley. And it will come out of the Pine Valley Fund 61. And I'm just asking for approval to take to county court.
I'll make one.
By Supervisor Cooey to approve. Have a second?
And a second for the question.
Second by Supervisor Glassbrenner. Go ahead with your question.
When you said that it comes out of your Fund 61, so does that mean then it's in the adopted budget or within?
Yeah, we budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions? Mr. Carroll.
This includes installation.
Yes, this is everything.
MIS staff does the installation. This does not include.
MIS.
installation.
Yep.
Other questions? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, thank you very much. Do we have any correspondence?
None for me to report.
All right, just to give you an update, the county administrator evaluations went out today by email. So they went to all board members and all department heads. The deadline to get them back to me is Friday, the 9th of November, so that by our next finance and executive committee meeting, I can have them compiled and we can do a closed session to go through those. That would be a future agenda item. There will be a self-evaluation sent to Candace for her to do on herself as well, to consider as part of that. Any other future agenda items? Mr. Carroll.
Are we going to revisit the whole ethics board question?
Me too.
We put it off with the idea that we wanted to give people time to come up with alternatives, so we can put it on the agenda and see.
Just ask.
Yeah, we should
talked
ask.
about a 6 month, I think was the timeframe. Was
That
it?
was, that was the interim time frame we give, but if we're gonna have something in
We
place
could
by
do stuff
then.
earlier than 6
Yes.
months, but
But
yeah.
were we also revising the ethics?
Ethics ordinance?
Have
Well,
talked-
We had, if a code of conduct is implemented in the rules of the board, I believe that, some of the provisions of the ethics code are better enforced through that mechanism. And then there's just some revisions and updates that I'd like to get done, but, last time I did report that overall it's not objectionable in any way. It mostly just codifies what's already in state statute.
So it's not broken, but it could be improved.
Correct.
It
The-
doesn't have to be done prior to the formation of an ethics.
Well, the issue is it's the only one we have, and it designates that there is the body, the ethics board. And so what was under discussion is what the composition of the ethics board should be, whether it's citizen members or a group of board supervisors or, so that discussion should probably be had because again, that's at least in part this board governing itself. And so it's appropriate for you guys to make that decision.
Let's get it settled.
And I do believe that Andy Phillips
Yeah.
also has some suggestions on how to just solidify the ethics ordinance and on makeup as well. He's had
Based on
quite a bit of
experience.
experience.
and stuff.
Yeah.
It'd be good to get
Yeah,
those.
sure.
that-
And to clarify to people, Andy is doing this for us on behalf of WCA. It's not billing Richland County for these services. So,
No, this is all on behalf of WCA because we were kind of the guinea pigs for the board.
yes.
So,
Wait, I thought he said Langley already had them.
no, our board rules, our new board rules,
Yes.
that's the template. If you watched, in the boardroom, the template that is being used is actually Richland County's template.
Minus a couple of our
Minus
specifics.
a couple of specifics and with
Yes, so,
suggestions and varying pieces of different language that could be used. So,
I asked Andy, so does that mean we might get asked to be a part of a conference presentation at some point because we want to share this information? We can't say, well, it happens, so. All right, any other future agenda items?
I have one, Mr. Supervisor Severson.
Yes, Mr. Severson, go ahead.
We talk about the rules of the county board. I assume that this is gonna go to county board tomorrow night and get passed, but like, I think that we should have more of a definition of what like neglect of duty means and what's that other one that I was looking at?
Is it inefficiency?
Yeah, inefficiency and then so on with the other things that I commented on because we really don't have any definition. And then we're gonna apply these rules and then may possibly enforce those within the next day or two afterwards. It could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it could. And we don't have a definition for that. And then that just brings up a case for litigation and stuff. And we don't have those defined. So I think it should wait until we have those
Those are things
definitions
we need to
down.
be mindful of and keeping in mind what Andy said, that statute doesn't define it either, so. But that's, something we definitely need to be mindful of, so.
So, Mr. Chair, can I clarify, did you want anything like that as an agenda item?
I think our agenda item for the next meeting could just be a review of recently adopted rules. And we could have discussion on some of the points that are in there if we need to clarify anything to the best of our ability.
I think we need to focus on the reasonable part of everything to do with them rules. If we focus on reasonable, it's gonna really regulate the peaks and valleys. I think that's a very strong mess and very important.
All right, any other future agenda items? If not, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Supervisor Glassbrenner, second by Mr. Gill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.